Hi, I'm Guin.
And I'm Joey.
And you're listening to Guin and Joey Take Politics. So I just thought it would be a good idea today, since there was an election this past Monday, September 14th.
Right.
September 14th. I thought it would be a good idea to talk about the New Brunswick election, the first COVID election. And so, I'm not from New Brunswick, but you are. Maybe you could talk a little bit about what this election was like and how it was different from past elections.
Yeah, so I think the main way we've seen a change in voter behavior was the turn up in advance polls. Greater than half the votes that were cast in this election were cast in the advance polls, so I think people were kind of looking to flatten the busyness at the polling stations and maybe get out earlier so it wasn't so busy the day election came. And I think that worked really well. When I went to go vote, everyone was wearing masks, but it wasn't packed in there because most people had already voted. And I think that was and I think everyone felt safe pretty well doing it, so it was good.
So you actually voted on election day?
Yes, I did. I did choose to vote on election day.
And was it different, the actual election day, other than wearing masks? Was there any kind of difference?
Very little difference, I would say. They were sanitizing the markers used to fill out the ballots, and they were sanitizing the ballot envelopes. But besides that, by now we're used to seeing everyone in masks, so that wasn't too different. I would say it's pretty similar to other elections.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So again, because I'm not from New Brunswick, I wasn't really able to participate in it too much, but from the perspective of a New Brunswicker, did you find that the proximity of this election to the last election, which happened, 2 years ago, 1 year ago?
2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, I think.
Okay, what from
Just
your
under.
perspective, what was that like? What how do you feel about that?
Yeah, so as a bit of a politics nerd myself, I guess you could call me. I don't mind elections, but to the uninvolved voter, I think maybe there's a sense of election fatigue. You know, we had one 2 years ago here in New Brunswick, and I believe it was October that time again, even so exactly 2 years ago maybe, and then a year ago we had a federal election. And then this year we're back to the polls and a provincial election, and it's looking like we might even go to a federal election again. So I don't know. There wasn't a huge decrease in voter turnout, but I think if there's a federal election, then maybe people say I'm kind of tired of this. I'm not going again. Figure it out yourself.
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
Definitely. From where I was coming from, I even heard some people saying, like, if Higgs calls another election, I'm not going to vote. Like,
oh, yeah?
And I guess that kind of moves into my what I kind of want to talk about next pretty well. I heard a lot of Premier Higgs. He's the Conservative leader who won this past election. The Conservatives won a majority. They were happy with the results.
Yep. But
something that I heard a lot on election night coming from the Liberals and the People's Alliance and the NDP was, this was an election about Premier Higgs, and it was not about New Brunswickers, and it was about Higgs and his agenda, and it wasn't good for New Brunswickers, and it's going to result again in this election fatigue, and it was unnecessary. And I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think obviously he had a minority. It's harder to get stuff done with a minority government, and
of course.
And if there's a majority of New Brunswickers who agree with what Higgs wants to do, like, maybe it's a good idea to work towards a majority, but I don't know. What do you think about that?
Yeah, it looks like what we've seen is clearly that message did not resonate with the voters. I can't guess as to why that is, but we saw neither of the NDP or the Liberal leaders even winning the seat they were running in. So I think if you do want to see it as a referendum on the Higgs government, it came out overwhelmingly positive for Premier Higgs, and the messages by the Liberal and NDP aren't exceptionally relevant anymore, but their messaging didn't really resonate they're going to have to think long and hard about what they're going to try and say in the next election, probably 4 years from now.
Yeah, so I guess I kind of agree with you. Like, what you're saying is no matter what the opposing party said, like, that just wasn't the case. That New Brunswickers did choose to vote for Higgs, and
yeah.
I mean, so another really interesting thing is the Liberal leader. What was his name?
His name was Kevin Vickers.
Kevin Vickers. So obviously his party was pushing this idea that this election was all about Higgs and it wasn't about New Brunswickers and it was unnecessary. But he did terribly, and I'm just sort of like, from my perspective, that does not say. It sounds like he really didn't resonate with voters, and it sounds like his political career might be on the line. He was never elected, and he's their leader.
Well, he actually did resign on election night, so his political career is essentially over. I think the Liberal Party and New Brunswickers even were expecting a lot more from Kevin Vickers. You know, he was heavily involved in taking down that shooter on Parliament Hill a few years ago, kind of recognized as a national hero, and then ambassador to Ireland, I believe, for a few years. So I think coming in, we expected him to be a lot stronger and, you know, kind of come up with a message that people could get behind, but that didn't quite happen. So I don't know what's going to happen to them now.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually didn't. I knew that Kevin Vickers had that background, but I hadn't, when I was watching the election results, I'd forgotten. He is actually really impressive and seemed very well suited for the job.
He had the resume.
Yeah.
I don't know what held him back.
Honestly, I hadn't thought about it too much. I mean, it might be COVID, you know. Normally in elections, leaders have the opportunity to go out and speak to crowds and shake people's hands and knock on people's doors. And, you know, as an up-and-coming leader of the second largest party in the province, he didn't have the opportunity to do that, whereas he honestly would have if it hadn't been for COVID. So,
yeah.
I mean, just thinking about it now, it probably was COVID related, because he had the resume for sure.
Yeah, so it might have just been timing related, and maybe it wasn't his failure. Maybe we're being too hard on him. Maybe it wasn't his failure, and New Brunswickers, whether it was Higgs or not, New Brunswickers aren't very scared of the COVID pandemic right now because there's only one case in the province.
Yeah.
So I think that reflects well on Higgs. So that might have benefited Higgs, and it might not have been a Liberal loss. It might have been a Conservative win, if you want to look at it that way.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, something else interesting about the province is that it's divided. I don't think people really understand just how deep the chasm is between French and English-speaking New Brunswick. And you really saw that in this election because, you know, French-speaking New Brunswick, all red. English-speaking New Brunswick, primarily blue. And I don't know, I think a lot of political commentators on election night were talking about that. Just that line is so clear, you know, northern New Brunswick, all red, all Liberal, and like the south of the province, what English-speaking New Brunswick was primarily Conservative. So I don't know, can you think of any reasons why that is?
Yeah, and I think first I'll touch on Higgs' rhetoric around this, which is Premier Higgs' rhetoric is sort of problematic. He's saying it's a political problem with the Francophones in that part of the province, saying that he said that the Liberals could run a lampshade in those ridings and it would win. But what he fails to seem to notice is former Conservative premiers, Bernard Lord, Richard Hadfield, David Allward, they didn't win Northern New Brunswick, but they had seats up there at least. Mm-hmm. So I think this is some sort of failure by Higgs to kind of get any sort of traction up in that part of the province, and I don't know why that is. But even the riding that didn't go Liberal went People's Alliance, which is the least popular among most Francophones. So I think he needs to start thinking about this quite seriously and figuring out what he can do to get that part of the province on board with the rest of us, with his plans, so that we don't see this division that exists in the province.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I actually heard him say, I heard on the CBC, there was some, just listening to, as results were coming in, they were just a bit of chit chat, and, they were saying, well, here's this divide, and, here's what Higgs has to say about it. And he was talking about schools and how we need to improve, what are you going to do to help the Francophone community? And he was talking about in English schools, how he was going to improve the French, trying to improve the French curriculum, which honestly is so out of touch. Like, what are you going to do for French-speaking New Brunswick? You're going to help Anglophone kids learn French. Like, that was what... And also, I don't think he made any efforts even to speak French, and his French is pretty renowned for being atrocious.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's really interesting.
Je suis non parler français.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah, I guess, like, kind of to finish off, like, this was the first election that took place in Canada during, pandemic times, and that it went extremely smoothly. So when I was watching it, I was juxtaposing it to the recent Conservative leadership race that I followed and watched the night of. And, that couldn't have gone worse.
Yeah.
It went so poorly, and they were blaming it on COVID. And this was honestly similar scale and couldn't have gone better. Like, it took 40 minutes and all the results were in, and everyone was wrapping it up and calling it a night and getting to bed on time. So, I mean, it was really impressive, and from my perspective, like, quite a win for New Brunswick, and I mean, showing other provinces who are thinking about going into elections that, hey, it's possible and it can go really well.
Yeah, and I believe Saskatchewan has an upcoming election, is that right?
Yeah, that is right, and they were talking a lot about how Saskatchewan might be taking some cues from New Brunswick and maybe going into an election, because it is possible. It is
possible. Of course, New Brunswick is a bit of a unique case with so few cases, but I think precautions were followed, and I think it was an extreme success.
Yeah, I agree. Okay, well, Joey, it's always a pleasure recording with you, and can't wait for our next podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Okay, take care.
Bye.